I thought the worst thing that could happen at Melissa's sleepover was running out of pizza. I was wrong, dead wrong. What happened that night in February 2023 still makes me check my locks twice before bed, and I haven't been to a house party since. Melissa Chen lived in one of those newer developments in Riverside, California. You know the type, where every house looks identical except for the paint color. Her parents were visiting her grandparents in San Francisco for the weekend, leaving her with strict instructions about no boys and no alcohol. Of course, we had other plans. There were 8 of us total: me, Melissa, Sarah Williams, Jessica Martinez, Amanda Thompson, Rachel Davis, and 2 guys from school, Tyler Johnson and Marcus Rodriguez. We'd been planning this for weeks. Melissa's house was perfect: big backyard, neighbors who minded their own business, and parents who wouldn't be back until Sunday evening. The party started normal enough. We ordered pizza, played music, and Tyler had somehow gotten his hands on a few beers. Nothing crazy, just typical 17-year-old weekend stuff. The house was warm and bright, with those modern LED lights throughout. Melissa's dad was an electrician, so their place always had the best lighting setup. Around 9:30 p.m., we decided to play Truth or Dare in the living room. I remember because I was checking my phone when the first weird thing happened. All the outdoor security lights suddenly went dark. Through the big picture window, I could see the neighboring houses still had their lights on, but Melissa's entire backyard was pitch black. "That's weird," Alyssa said, walking to the window. "Dad just installed those new motion sensors last month." Tyler laughed it off. "Probably just a blown fuse or something. My dad's always dealing with electrical issues." We kept playing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The outdoor lights weren't just motion sensors. They were supposed to stay on until midnight. Melissa's dad had explained the whole system to us once, talking about how important security lighting was in new developments. At 10:15 p.m., the power went out completely. 1 second we were laughing at Marcus's ridiculous dare, and the next we were plunged into absolute darkness. Not just dim, complete, suffocating blackness. The kind where you can't see your hand in front of your face. "Okay, very funny," Sarah said nervously. "Who found the breaker box?" But none of us had moved. We were all accounted for, sitting in the living room circle. Melissa fumbled for her phone's flashlight. "This doesn't make sense. We're on the same grid as the neighbors, and their lights are still on." She was right. Through the windows, we could see the houses across the street were still illuminated. Just Melissa's house had gone dark. "Maybe it's just your house's main breaker," Jessica suggested, but her voice had that forced calm that meant she was trying not to panic. Melissa led us to the garage where the electrical panel was located. Her dad had shown her the basics of checking breakers, but when she opened the panel with her phone light, everything looked normal. All the switches were in the on position. "Try flipping the main breaker," Tyler suggested. Melissa switched it off and back on. Nothing happened. "This is really weird," she said. "Dad always said if the main breaker looks good but there's still no power, it usually means there's a problem with the external connection." That's when we heard it, the sound of a car door slamming somewhere in the neighborhood. Then another. And another. "Are people leaving?" Amanda whispered. We went back to the living room and peered out the windows. The neighboring houses were still lit up, but now we could see people in several yards, holding flashlights and checking their own electrical panels. "Wait," Rachel said slowly. "Count the dark houses." We looked more carefully. Melissa's house, the blue house 2 doors down, the gray house across the street, and the beige house on the corner, all dark. But the houses in between were still lit. "That's not a grid failure," Marcus said. "That's not random." My stomach dropped. He was right. Power grids don't fail in a checkerboard pattern like that. This was deliberate. "Someone's cutting power to specific houses," I said, voicing what we were all thinking. "But why?" Sarah asked. "What's the point?" Before anyone could answer, we heard footsteps on the gravel driveway. Slow, deliberate steps coming toward the front door. We all froze. Melissa's parents weren't due back until Sunday. None of us had invited anyone else. The footsteps stopped at the front door. Then silence. Maybe it's someone checking on the power outage, Jessica whispered hopefully. But there was no knock. No doorbell. Just waiting. Tyler grabbed a baseball bat from the closet. I'm going to check. Don't, Melissa hissed. If someone's out there, we need to call the police. She tried her phone. No signal. What? She tried again, moving to different spots in the house. I always have full bars here. We all checked our phones. Nothing. Not even emergency service. Cell towers need power, Marcus said grimly. If someone's taking out electrical infrastructure. The footsteps started again, but this time they were moving around the house. Slow, measured steps along the side yard, then the back patio. We need to get out of here, Amanda said, her voice shaking. And go where? Melissa asked. My car's in the garage, and it's electric. Without power, I can't even open the garage door. Mine's parked on the street, Tyler said. We could make a run for it. What if that's what they want? Sarah asked. What if they're waiting for us to come outside? The footsteps had stopped at the back sliding door. Through the glass, we could see a dark silhouette. Someone was standing on the patio, not moving, just watching. That's when we realized we were trapped. Okay, Melissa whispered. Dad keeps emergency supplies in the basement. Flashlights, battery radio, first aid kit. We need to get down there quietly. We made our way to the basement stairs, Tyler leading with the bat and Melissa lighting the way with her phone. The basement was unfinished, concrete floor, exposed ceiling, storage boxes everywhere. But it felt safer than being on the main floor with all those windows. Melissa found her dad's emergency kit and handed out flashlights. She also found a battery-powered radio and turned it on low volume. Reports of coordinated power outages in the Riverside area, a news anchor was saying. Police are investigating what appears to be deliberate sabotage of electrical infrastructure in several residential neighborhoods. Residents are advised to stay indoors and contact emergency services if they observe suspicious activity. So it's not just us, Rachel said with relief. But I wasn't feeling relieved. If this was happening across multiple neighborhoods, it wasn't some random break-in. This was organized. Why would someone do this? Amanda asked. Lots of reasons, Tyler said grimly. Rob houses when security systems are down. Force people outside where they're vulnerable. Create chaos as a distraction for something bigger. That's when we heard the sound of breaking glass upstairs. Someone had just broken into the house. We turned off all the flashlights and sat in complete darkness, barely breathing. Above us, we could hear footsteps moving through the first floor, not trying to be quiet anymore, just methodically searching. They're looking for something, Marcus whispered so quietly I could barely hear him. Or someone, I thought but didn't say. The footsteps moved to the kitchen, then the living room, then started toward the basement door. Melissa grabbed my arm. There's a workshop area behind the water heater. She breathed in my ear. We can hide there. We moved as quietly as possible toward the back of the basement. The workshop area was cramped but had a partial wall that blocked the view from the main basement. We huddled behind workbenches and tool cabinets. The basement door opened. A flashlight beam swept across the concrete floor. Heavy boots on the wooden stairs. One person, moving carefully, sweeping the light back and forth. From our hiding spot, we could see the beam moving closer. The person was checking behind boxes, under the stairs, being thorough. Tyler still had the baseball bat, but there were 8 of us hiding in a space meant for one person. If we were found, we'd be trapped. The footsteps stopped near the water heater. The flashlight beam was pointing in our direction. Then, suddenly, the light went out. We waited in absolute silence. No footsteps. No breathing. Nothing. Minutes passed. Still nothing. Finally, Tyler whispered, I think they left. But I wasn't convinced. Why would someone search the basement so thoroughly, then just leave? It felt like a trap. We need to stay put, I whispered back. Good thing we did. 20 minutes later, we heard the footsteps again, this time coming from outside the basement windows. Whoever it was had gone back upstairs and was now checking the exterior of the house. They're looking for other ways in, Melissa realized. Or ways out. This is insane, Sarah said. Why us? Why this house? Maybe it's not about us specifically, Marcus said thoughtfully. Think about it. They cut power to specific houses in a pattern. What if they're not looking for people? What if they're looking for something else? Like what? I don't know. But my dad works in cybersecurity, and he's always talking about how criminals use power outages to disable security systems, burglar alarms, surveillance cameras. You think this is about robbery? Jessica asked. Or worse, Tyler said. We stayed hidden for another hour, listening to sounds throughout the house. Sometimes footsteps, sometimes the sound of drawers being opened, sometimes periods of complete silence that were almost worse than the noise. At 1:30 a.m., we heard vehicles outside, multiple cars with doors slamming and voices talking in low, urgent tones. Police? Amanda whispered hopefully. We listened carefully. The voices were coordinated, professional. Someone was giving orders. Basement's clear, we heard from upstairs. Moving to the second floor. That's not the same voice, Melissa said. The person who was in here before had a different voice. Police, Tyler said with relief. Someone must have called in the break-in. But we stayed hidden until we heard the official announcement. Riverside Police Department. Is anyone in the house? We came out of hiding and called up the stairs. 3 officers came down to check on us, and what they told us made my blood run cold. You kids are lucky, Officer Patricia Henderson said. The perpetrators were using power outages to disable home security systems. They've hit 12 houses tonight, looking for something specific. The families who weren't home had their places ransacked. What were they looking for? Melissa asked. We're still investigating. But they seemed to know exactly which houses to target. This wasn't random. What about the families who were home? I asked, not sure I wanted to know the answer. Officer Henderson exchanged glances with her partner. Let's just say you kids did the right thing by staying hidden. We found out later that the whole thing was connected to a data breach at a local tech company. Someone had stolen employee records and was targeting the homes of people who worked on sensitive projects, looking for laptops, hard drives, and access codes. Melissa's dad, it turned out, had done electrical work for that same tech company. The criminals thought he might have equipment or information from the job site. They never caught the people who broke in that night. The investigation went cold after a few weeks. But I learned something important. Sometimes the scariest horror stories are the ones that don't have supernatural explanations. Sometimes the most terrifying thing is discovering that there are people out there who will plan meticulously to invade your safe space, who will cut power lines and break into homes while families are sleeping. The power came back on at 3:47 a.m. By then, we were all sitting in the living room with police officers, giving statements and waiting for Melissa's parents to drive back from San Francisco. But I'll never forget those hours in the dark, listening to footsteps above us, wondering what would have happened if we'd been found. The worst part wasn't the breaking glass or the lost power. It was the realization that someone had watched the house, planned the attack, and known exactly when to strike. I still can't sleep during power outages. And I never go to sleepovers anymore. I've lived in 7 different states thanks to my dad's job, but I've never felt unsafe in a new house until we moved to Bakersfield. What happened during my first week in that place on Cedar Lane still makes me sleep with blackout curtains, and I check every window lock twice before bed. We just relocated from Phoenix in March 2023. Dad got transferred to manage a new distribution center, and Mom was excited about the fresh start, after my younger brother Jake had gotten into some trouble at his old school. I was less thrilled about starting senior year at a new high school, but the house seemed nice enough, a two-story colonial in an established neighborhood called Hillcrest Estates. The moving truck arrived on a Tuesday. Our new address was 847 Cedar Lane, a white house with black shutters and a big oak tree in the front yard. The neighbors seemed friendly. Mrs. Patricia Coleman from next door brought over cookies and told us about the Neighborhood Watch program. Mr. Robert Evans across the street helped Dad carry our heavier boxes. "You'll love it here," Mrs. Coleman said. "Very quiet street. Safe for families." The house had 4 bedrooms, which meant I finally got my own room instead of sharing with Jake. I picked the corner bedroom on the 2nd floor because it had windows on 2 walls and got great natural light. Dad helped me set up my desk by the main window so I could do homework while looking out at the street. That first night, I was exhausted from unpacking. My room was still mostly boxes, but I'd managed to set up my bed and hang some clothes in the closet. I fell asleep easily, probably around 11 p.m. I woke up at 2:17 a.m. with that weird feeling you get when someone's watching you. You know that sensation, like when a teacher calls on you in class and you look up to find everyone staring. Except I was alone in my room, in the dark, and the feeling was so strong it made my skin crawl. I lay there for a few minutes, trying to convince myself it was just nerves from sleeping in a new place. But the feeling wouldn't go away. Finally, I sat up and looked around the room. That's when I saw the silhouette at my window. Someone was standing outside, pressed against the glass, looking directly at me. I jerked backwards so hard I fell out of bed, landing on the hardwood floor with a thud that definitely woke up Jake in the next room. "Emma? You okay?" he called through the wall. I scrambled to my feet and looked at the window again. Nothing. Just the oak tree's branches swaying in the wind. "Yeah, I just fell out of bed," I called back, my voice shaking. But I knew what I'd seen. The silhouette had been human-shaped, tall enough to reach the 2nd-story window. Which should have been impossible since there was no ladder, no balcony, nothing to climb. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, pointing it at the window. The glass showed no handprints, no marks. The screen was still intact. But the oak tree's branches were thick enough and close enough that someone athletic could potentially climb out onto them. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I told my parents what happened. Dad checked the tree and the area under my window, but there were no footprints in the mulch, no broken branches. "Probably just tree shadows," Mom said. "It takes time to adjust to new surroundings. Different light patterns, different sounds." But that night, I made sure to close my curtains completely before bed. I woke up at 2:23 a.m., 6 minutes later than the night before. The feeling was back, stronger this time. Like someone was standing right next to my bed, staring down at me. Even with the curtains closed, I could sense a presence at the window. Not just looking, waiting. I grabbed my phone and opened the camera app, switching it to video mode. Then I slowly pulled back the edge of the curtain. The person was there again. Closer this time, face pressed against the glass. I hit record and whispered, "Oh my God! Oh my God!" But when I looked at the video afterward, it just showed the empty window and tree branches. Whatever was out there didn't show up on camera. That's when I started to panic. Either I was losing my mind, or something was very wrong with this house. The 3rd night, I set up my laptop to record the window while I slept. I also moved my bed to the opposite wall, as far from the windows as possible. I woke up at 2:31 a.m. This time, I didn't look at the window. Instead, I checked my laptop screen. The recording showed nothing unusual for the first few hours, just the window and tree branches moving in the wind. But at exactly 2:15 a.m., the branches stopped moving. Everything went completely still, like someone had hit pause on nature itself. Then, at 2:17 a.m., a shadow appeared at the window. Not a person, just a human-shaped darkness that seemed to absorb light rather than block it. It stayed there for exactly 14 minutes, then disappeared. I was watching this on my laptop screen while sitting in my bed, and I could feel that presence at the window right now, at 2:31 a.m. But when I looked at the live view on my laptop, the window appeared empty. The recording was showing me something my eyes couldn't see in real time. I took screenshots of the shadow figure and saved the video file. Then I did something that probably saved my life. I researched the house's history online. The previous owners were the Harrison family, David, Michelle, and their teenage daughter Stephanie. They'd lived there for 3 years before moving suddenly in January 2023, just 2 months before we bought the place. I found their old social media profiles. Stephanie Harrison had posted about loving her corner bedroom, the same room I was now sleeping in. Her last posts were from December 2022, and they were disturbing. Can't sleep. Someone keeps watching me. Parents think I'm making it up, but I know someone's out there. Found scratches on my window screen. Definitely not from tree branches. We're moving. Finally. Never felt safe in this house. My blood ran cold. Stephanie Harrison had experienced the exact same thing I was going through. But here's where it gets really scary. I kept digging through public records and found something that changed everything. In 2019, a man named Kenneth Walsh had been arrested for stalking and harassment in our neighborhood. He'd been watching families through their windows, learning their routines, breaking into houses when people were away. He specifically targeted teenage girls in second-story bedrooms. Walsh was released from county jail in December 2022, right around the time Stephanie Harrison's posts got desperate. He was still living in the area, 3 blocks away, in an apartment complex called Westwood Manor. I printed out everything I'd found and took it to my parents the next morning. Dad called the police immediately. Officer Michael Torres came to the house that afternoon and took my statement. He knew about Kenneth Walsh. We've had reports about him in this area, Officer Torres said. But proving stalking is difficult. If he's not on your property when we arrive, and he's not leaving physical evidence. But I have video, I said, showing him the laptop recording. Officer Torres watched the footage, frowning. I see tree branches moving, but I don't see a person. Look at timestamp 217, I insisted. There's clearly a shadow figure. He watched again, then looked at me with concern. Miss, I don't see anything unusual in this video. Just trees and normal shadows. That's when I realized the horrible truth. Whatever was recording on my laptop wasn't showing up for other people. Just like my phone video, the evidence was disappearing when viewed by anyone else. But Officer Torres did take my research about Kenneth Walsh seriously. We'll increase patrols in this area and have a talk with Mr. Walsh about his activities. That night, I convinced my parents to let me sleep in Jake's room. I set up my laptop to keep recording my empty bedroom. At 2:15 a.m., according to the timestamp, my bedroom door opened. Someone walked into my room, moved around for several minutes, then approached the bed where I should have been sleeping. The figure stood there for a long time before leaving. But here's the thing. My bedroom door was locked from the inside. The windows were closed and locked. There was no way for someone to physically enter that room. Yet the recording clearly showed the door opening and a person walking around my bedroom. That's when Officer Torres called the next morning with news that made everything make sense in the worst possible way. We checked on Kenneth Walsh last night, he said. He wasn't at his apartment. Neighbors said he'd been acting strange, talking about unfinished business in Hillcrest Estates. Where is he? Dad asked. We found his body this morning in Riverside Park. Looks like he's been dead for at least 2 weeks, possibly longer. Coroner thinks it was exposure and malnutrition. He'd been living rough, maybe having a mental health crisis. My stomach dropped. 2 weeks? Yeah. Which means whoever was watching your daughter's window, it wasn't Kenneth Walsh. At least not recently. That changed everything. If Walsh was dead, then who had been at my window for the past 3 nights? We moved out of the house that same day, staying in a hotel while Dad looked for a different rental. But before we left, I did one last thing. I checked with the neighbors about the history of 847 Cedar Lane. Mrs. Coleman looked uncomfortable when I asked. There have been incidents over the years. Different families, same complaints. Always the corner bedroom upstairs. What kind of incidents? Families reporting prowlers, stalkers, break-ins. But police never find evidence. Eventually people just move away. How long has this been happening? Since I moved here in 2015. Maybe longer. That's when Mr. Evans from across the street joined the conversation. You want to know the truth about that house? Check the property records from before it was built. There used to be an apartment building on that lot. I looked up the old property records at the city planning office. The current house was built in 2011 on the site of Hillcrest Manor Apartments, which had been demolished after a fire in 2010. One person died in that fire, a maintenance worker named Thomas Bradley who lived in the building. He was found in what would now be the location of the corner bedroom upstairs. According to the fire report, Bradley had been exhibiting erratic behavior before his death, including inappropriate surveillance of female residents and violations of privacy boundaries. He died alone in his apartment, and his body wasn't discovered for 3 days. We never moved back to Cedar Lane. Dad found us a different house across town, and I finished senior year at Bakersfield High without any more incidents. But sometimes I wonder about the families who moved into 847 Cedar Lane after us. I hope they don't have a teenage daughter who picks the corner bedroom upstairs. And I hope they're smart enough to research the history before they experience what I went through. Those 3 nights of being watched by someone who couldn't be caught on camera, couldn't be seen by adults, and couldn't be stopped by locks or police reports. Because the worst part wasn't the fear or the lost sleep. The worst part was realizing that some houses have problems that can't be solved by moving away. They just get passed on to the next family, the next teenage girl who picks the wrong bedroom window. I still keep those video files on my laptop. The recordings that show empty windows to everyone else, but show me the truth about what's still watching from that oak tree on Cedar Lane. Have you ever felt like someone was watching you sleep? Has moving to a new house ever made you feel unsafe in ways you couldn't explain to adults? Let me know in the comments if you've experienced something similar, because I'm starting to think this happens more often than people admit. I should have trusted my instincts about the Desert Rose Motel. The place looked sketchy from the highway, but Mom was exhausted from driving, and it was the only place with vacancy between Fresno and our destination in Nevada. What I discovered that night in April 2023 still makes me paranoid about every hotel room I've stayed in since. We were driving from our old place in Modesto to Las Vegas, where Mom had gotten a job at a medical billing company. It was supposed to be a fresh start after the divorce, just Mom and me making our own way. Dad was staying in California, and honestly, I was relieved to be getting away from all the fighting and court hearings that had dominated the last year of our lives. The Desert Rose Motel sat off Highway 58 near Bakersfield, one of those single-story places from the 1970s that looked like it hadn't been updated since. The neon sign flickered vacancy, in pink letters, and half the parking lot lights were burned out. The building was arranged in an L shape, with the office at the corner and maybe 20 rooms stretching out in 2 directions. Everything was painted that faded turquoise color that screamed, "Budget accommodation. Just for one night, sweetheart," Mom said, pulling her 2017 Honda Civic into the gravel parking lot. "We'll get an early start tomorrow and be in Vegas by noon." The desk clerk was a thin guy in his 50s named Gary Patterson, according to his name tag. He had the kind of pale skin that suggested he worked nights and slept during the day, with deep-set eyes that seemed to take in every detail. When Mom asked for 2 beds, he looked at me, I was 17 then, with an expression that made my skin crawl. Not obviously creepy, just too interested. "Room 23, he said, sliding an actual metal key across the cracked Formica counter. "End of the row, nice and quiet. You ladies will have plenty of privacy." The way he said privacy made something in my stomach twist, but Mom was too tired to notice. The room was exactly what you'd expect from a place like that. Faded brown carpet that felt sticky under our feet, furniture that had seen better decades, and a musty smell that suggested the air conditioning hadn't been cleaned in years. The bedspreads were that generic floral pattern you see in every cheap motel, and the TV was one of those old tube models from the early 2000s. But the beds looked clean enough, and there was a deadbolt on the door plus a chain lock. The bathroom was small but functional, with a tiny window that actually opened, something I noted automatically as a potential emergency exit, though I didn't mention that to Mom. She was already stressed enough about the move and starting over. "At least there's cable," Mom said, trying to stay positive as she flipped through channels on the old TV. "And look, they have a microwave and a mini fridge. We can grab some drinks from the vending machine." I was more interested in checking the locks and looking around the room. The windows had those old-style air conditioning units built into the wall, and I could hear them cycling on and off with a mechanical hum. The ceiling had those standard acoustic tiles you see in office buildings, with rectangular vents for the heating and cooling system. We ordered pizza from a place that delivered to the motel, Gino's Pizza, which Gary Patterson had recommended when Mom asked about nearby food options. The delivery guy was a college-aged kid named Brandon Lopez who seemed normal enough, friendly and talkative. "You guys just passing through?" he asked while Mom counted out cash for the tip. "Moving to Vegas," Mom said. "New job opportunity. Fresh start, you know?" Brandon nodded sympathetically. "That's cool. Vegas is a good place to reinvent yourself." Then he looked directly at me and lowered his voice slightly. "Hey, fair warning, if you hear any weird noises tonight, don't worry about it. This place has a rodent problem. Mice in the walls, rats in the ceiling, that kind of thing. The owner's too cheap to call an exterminator." "Gross," I said, but I was actually grateful for the heads up. "Yeah, it's not dangerous or anything, just annoying. Scratching sounds, stuff moving around in the vents. Normal for an old place like this." After he left, Mom and I ate pizza while watching a late-night comedy show. She was exhausted from the emotional stress of the move and the physical stress of driving for 8 hours, so she was asleep by 10:30, still in her clothes on top of the bedspread. I stayed up reading on my phone, trying to get tired enough to sleep in the unfamiliar room. The air conditioning unit was loud and cycled on and off every few minutes with a mechanical clunk. Outside, I could hear the occasional truck on the highway and the distant sound of other motel guests, doors slamming, muffled conversations, someone's TV turned up too loud. Around midnight, I started hearing what Brandon had warned us about, scratching sounds in the walls. At first, it sounded exactly like mice or rats scurrying through the space between the walls and ceiling. Normal enough for an old motel in a rural area, especially one that didn't spend much on maintenance. But after listening for a while, the sounds got weird. Instead of the quick, random scratching you'd expect from rodents, I started hearing rhythmic scraping. Like something was methodically moving through the ductwork, pausing every few feet, then continuing in a deliberate pattern. The air conditioning kicked on, and I could hear something rattling in the vents above my bed. Not the normal rattle of loose metal or debris, but something smaller and more deliberate. Like tiny claws on metal, but with a mechanical quality that didn't sound quite right for animals. I looked up at the ceiling vent directly above my bed. The metal grate was slightly crooked, and in the dim light from the parking lot outside, I could see something moving behind it. The movement was too purposeful, too focused to be random air currents or normal ventilation mechanics. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight app, pointing it at the ceiling vent. What I saw made me freeze with terror. There was an eye looking back at me through the vent slats. Not an animal eye, a camera lens. Round, black, and definitely mechanical, with a tiny red light blinking next to it. But here's the thing that made it even more terrifying: the lens was moving. Not just rotating or focusing, but actually crawling along the inside of the ductwork like it was alive. I could see mechanical legs or appendages gripping the metal surfaces as it repositioned itself. I watched, horrified, as this thing, whatever it was, moved to get a better angle of both beds. The scratching sounds I'd been hearing weren't mice at all. There were these devices moving through the ventilation system, and there were multiple ones based on the different sounds coming from different parts of the ceiling. I immediately reached over and grabbed Mom's shoulder, shaking her awake as gently as possible while trying not to make any sudden movements that might alert whoever was controlling these things. Mom! I whispered urgently. Mom, wake up. We need to leave. Right now. She was groggy and confused, her voice thick with sleep. What? Honey, what's wrong? What time is it? There are cameras in the vents. Someone's watching us. Look up at the ceiling. Mom looked at me like I was having a nightmare or maybe sleepwalking. Cameras? Sweetheart, you're probably just tired from the drive. It's been a stressful day. That's when we both heard it. A mechanical whirring sound from the vent above her bed, followed by a soft click. Like a camera taking a picture, but amplified in the metal ductwork. Mom's eyes went wide. She looked up at the ceiling, and I pointed my phone flashlight at the vent above her bed. Another lens was visible through the slats, and this one was clearly recording. A tiny red light was blinking next to the lens, and I could see the device adjusting its position to get a better view of Mom as she sat up in bed. "Oh my God!" Mom whispered, her voice barely audible. "How many are there?" I moved the flashlight beam around the ceiling, checking all the vents I could see. There were at least 4 devices that I could identify, one above each bed, one near the bathroom door, and one positioned to view the area near the window and door. "Get dressed," Mom said quietly. "Grab our bags. We're leaving right now." We started throwing our stuff into our bags as quietly as possible, but I could hear the devices getting more active. The scratching and mechanical sounds increased, and when I looked up, I could see the camera lenses tracking our movements around the room. Here's the really sick part. When we were getting dressed and gathering our things, the devices moved closer to the vents, like they were trying to get better angles and clearer shots. These weren't just security cameras. They were specifically positioned and programmed to watch people in private moments. The one above the bathroom had repositioned itself to point directly at the area where someone would be changing clothes or getting ready for bed. The sophistication of their movement suggested they were being controlled in real time by someone who was watching the feeds. Mom grabbed the car keys from the nightstand, and we headed for the door. But when she tried to unlock the deadbolt, it wouldn't turn. The metal key went into the lock, but the mechanism was completely stuck. "It's not working," she said, trying to force it. "The key won't turn at all." I looked more closely at the lock mechanism. What I had initially thought was a standard deadbolt was actually an electronic lock disguised to look like a regular one. The key slot was fake. It was controlled by some kind of electronic system. "They can control it remotely," I realized with growing panic. "They're keeping us locked in here." That's when we heard Gary Patterson's voice coming from somewhere in the room, but there was no visible intercom or speaker. "Everything okay in there, ladies?" Sounded like you were having some trouble sleeping. Mom and I looked at each other in complete terror. He'd been listening to everything we said. "We're fine," Mom called out, trying to keep her voice steady and normal. "Just needed to use the bathroom." "Well, you let me know if you need anything at all," Gary said, and his voice seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once, like there were hidden speakers throughout the room. "I'm always here to help our guests feel comfortable." The intercom clicked off, but I could still hear the mechanical sounds in the vents above us. The devices were more active now, moving around rapidly, and I could hear what sounded like additional ones entering the ductwork from other parts of the building. I grabbed Mom's arm and pulled her into the bathroom, turning on both the shower and the sink faucets to create noise cover. "The window," I whispered directly into her ear. "It's our only way out." The bathroom window was small, maybe 2 feet by 3 feet, but it opened fully and we were on the ground floor. I pushed it open and looked outside. The window faced the desert scrubland behind the motel rather than the parking lot, which meant we might be able to escape without being seen. "You first," Mom said. "I'll pass the bags through." I climbed onto the toilet seat, then onto the narrow windowsill. It was a tight squeeze, but I managed to get through and drop into the scrub brush and sand behind the building. Mom passed our bags through the window, then squeezed through herself, tearing her shirt slightly on the window frame. From outside, I could see things that were invisible from inside the room. Looking at the roofline, I could see that room 23 wasn't the only one with modified ventilation systems. Several rooms had newer-looking vents with small antennas attached, and there were cables running along the roof line that definitely weren't part of the original construction. There was also a small building behind the main motel that I hadn't noticed when we checked in. It looked like a maintenance shed, but it had multiple satellite dishes and what appeared to be a sophisticated antenna array on the roof. We made our way around the side of the building, staying low and moving quietly through the desert vegetation. Mom's Honda was parked directly in front of room 23, but getting to it meant crossing the open parking lot where we'd be visible from the office windows. When I say go, we run straight to the car. Mom whispered, "Don't look back, don't hesitate. Just get in and we'll figure out the rest. What if they try to stop us? Then we keep driving and call the police from the road." We waited for a truck to pass on the highway, using the noise to cover our movement. Go! We ran across the parking lot to the Honda. Mom had the car started before I even got my door closed, and we pulled out onto the highway with our headlights off, not turning them on until we were a quarter mile down the road. As we drove away, I looked back at the Desert Rose Motel. Gary Patterson was standing in the office window, watching us leave. But he wasn't alone. There were 2 other men with him, and one of them was holding what looked like a tablet or a laptop computer, probably monitoring the camera feeds. But here's the thing that really scared me. They didn't seem surprised or upset that we were leaving. They just watched us go, like this was something that happened regularly, and they had procedures for dealing with it. We drove straight to the Bakersfield Police Department, even though it was nearly 2 a.m. The night desk sergeant, Jennifer Rodriguez, listened to our story and took it seriously, especially when I showed her the video I'd managed to take with my phone. "We've had reports about that place before," Sergeant Rodriguez said, reviewing the footage on my phone. "Suspicious activity, guests reporting feeling unsafe, but nothing we could prove. This video is different though. This is clear evidence of illegal surveillance." The video clearly showed the mechanical devices in the vents, and the audio had captured the clicking sounds, the mechanical movement, and even Gary Patterson's voice coming through the hidden intercom system. "These aren't just cameras," Sergeant Rodriguez said, replaying the footage. "These look like some kind of mobile surveillance devices. I've never seen anything like this." She called in a detective who specialized in technology crimes, Detective Michael Chin, who arrived within an hour even though it was the middle of the night. "This is sophisticated equipment," Detective Chin said after reviewing the evidence. "Whoever set this up has significant technical knowledge and financial resources. We're talking about a professional operation." He explained that what we had encountered were essentially tiny robots designed to look and move like rats or mice. They could navigate through ventilation systems, position themselves for optimal surveillance, and transmit video back to a central recording location. The fact that they could control the door locks remotely suggests this is part of a larger system, Detective Chin said. "We need to get a search warrant immediately." The raid happened 2 days later, but it took a coordinated effort between local police, the FBI, and the California Department of Justice because the scope of the operation was much larger than anyone had initially suspected. What they found was worse than we'd imagined. Gary Patterson and his partners, Daniel Foster and Mark Sullivan, had been running a sophisticated voyeurism and extortion operation for over 3 years. They'd installed what they called mobile surveillance units in the ventilation systems of 16 different rooms across the motel. These devices weren't just cameras. They were basically tiny robots, each about the size of a real rat, equipped with high-definition cameras, microphones, infrared night vision, and wireless transmission capability. They could move through the ductwork under remote control, position themselves for optimal viewing angles, and operate for weeks on rechargeable batteries. The fake rats were controlled from a hidden room behind the motel office that was equipped with multiple computer monitors, recording equipment, and a sophisticated server system for storing and organizing the footage. But the really sick part was how they chose their targets. They had access to the reservation system and specifically targeted families with teenage daughters, single women, couples on romantic getaways, and anyone else they thought would provide content their clients would pay for. They'd been selling the recordings online to international clients through encrypted websites on the dark web. The FBI found evidence of over $2 million in profits from selling surveillance footage of unsuspecting guests. They'd also been using the footage for blackmail. If they recorded someone in a compromising situation, especially if it was someone prominent in their community, they would threaten to release the footage unless the person paid them. The electronic door lock system was part of their security measures. If guests discovered the surveillance or became suspicious, they could lock them in their rooms remotely, giving themselves time to delete evidence, or even drug the guests through the ventilation system. Yes, they were also pumping mild sedatives through the air conditioning in certain rooms to make guests sleep more deeply while they recorded them. The FBI found tanks of various chemicals hidden in the fake maintenance building behind the motel. All 3 men were arrested and charged with multiple federal felonies including conspiracy, violation of privacy, extortion, distribution of illegal surveillance footage, and running a criminal enterprise. Gary Patterson, who had been the leader of the operation, was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Foster and Sullivan each received 15 years. But the investigation revealed that the Desert Rose was just one location in a network of similar operations. The FBI found evidence that the same group was running comparable surveillance setups at 6 other motels across California, Nevada, and Arizona. They had recorded over 3,000 different people without their knowledge, including families, couples, and individuals who had no idea they were being watched and recorded during their most private moments. The technology they were using was apparently available for purchase online, marketed as security equipment, but obviously designed for illegal surveillance. The FBI's investigation led to the shutdown of several companies that were manufacturing and selling these devices. Mom and I had to testify at the trial via video link from Las Vegas, where we'd eventually settled. We never had to go back to Bakersfield, which was a relief because the whole experience had been traumatic enough. The Desert Rose Motel was permanently shut down after the raid, and the building was eventually demolished. But the experience fundamentally changed how I think about privacy and safety when traveling. I never stay in budget motels anymore without thoroughly checking the room first. I look for hidden cameras, test all the locks from the inside, examine the ventilation systems, and even bring a small radio frequency detector that can identify wireless transmission devices. And I always remember what the FBI agent told us during the investigation. This kind of operation is more common than people realize. Technology has made it easier and cheaper to spy on people, and the internet has made it profitable. What happened to you was sophisticated, but the basic concept is being replicated by criminals all over the country. The scariest part wasn't the technology itself, it was how normal and trustworthy Gary Patterson had seemed when we checked in. He was just a regular guy working a night shift at a motel, polite and helpful. But he was part of a criminal network that had been systematically violating people's privacy and dignity for years. I still have nightmares sometimes about those mechanical eyes watching us from the ceiling, and the sound of tiny metal legs scratching through the ventilation system. But mostly I think about all the other people who stayed in those rooms and never knew they were being watched. The FBI estimated that for every person who discovered the surveillance, there were probably 50 who never knew it was happening. People who thought they were safe in their private hotel room, who never suspected that their most intimate moments were being recorded and sold to strangers on the internet. Have you ever stayed somewhere that made you feel like you were being watched? Do you check for hidden cameras when you travel? After what happened to us, I think everyone should be more careful about the places they choose to stay, especially budget motels in isolated areas. Because the truth is, there are probably more places like the Desert Rose out there, with their fake rats crawling through the walls, recording people who just want a safe place to sleep for the night. I should have known something was seriously wrong when Aunt Helen insisted I sleep in the room with no door lock. What happened during those 3 nights at her house in Woodland, California in May 2023 still makes me question everything I thought I knew about family, and I haven't spoken to that side of the family since. My parents were going through a messy separation, and Mom needed somewhere safe to send me while they worked out custody arrangements with lawyers. Dad had been getting increasingly erratic, showing up at my school, following Mom to work, making threats about taking me out of state. The restraining order wasn't stopping him, so Mom decided I needed to stay somewhere he wouldn't think to look. Aunt Helen was Mom's older sister, and they hadn't spoken in almost 5 years after some family drama I was never fully told about. But when Mom called her in desperation, Helen immediately offered to let me stay at her place until things settled down. She's always been eccentric, Mom warned me as we loaded my stuff into her 2019 Toyota Camry. But she's harmless, and she lives way out in the country where your father would never think to look. Just humor her weird habits for a few days, okay? Helen lived alone in a 2-story farmhouse on Sycamore Road, about 20 minutes outside Woodland. The house was old, probably built in the 1920s, but well maintained. Big front porch, white paint, surrounded by walnut orchards that stretched for miles in every direction. It should have been peaceful and charming. Helen herself seemed normal enough at first. She was in her early 60s, retired from working as a nurse at UC Davis Medical Center. Thin, gray-haired, wearing the kind of practical clothes you'd expect from someone who lived alone in the country. She hugged me when we arrived and made all the right concerned noises about the situation with my parents. "Don't you worry about anything, sweetie," she said as Mom unloaded my bags. "We're going to take real good care of you here. I'll make sure you're safe and sound." The house was clean but felt stuck in time. Furniture from the 1980s, wallpaper with tiny flowers, the kind of heavy curtains that blocked out most of the natural light. Everything was perfectly organized, almost obsessively so. Books arranged by height, magazines stacked with military precision, not a single item out of place. "I've got you set up in the guest room upstairs," Helen said, leading me up a narrow staircase. "It's got a nice view of the orchards, and you'll have plenty of privacy." The guest room was at the end of a long hallway, separated from Helen's bedroom by a bathroom and what looked like an office or study. The room itself was pleasant enough. Twin bed with a white iron frame, antique dresser, rocking chair by the window. But I immediately noticed that the door didn't have a lock, just a basic knob that turned. "I don't believe in locks inside family homes," Helen said when she saw me checking the door. "They create barriers between people who should trust each other." That first evening seemed normal. Helen made dinner, pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, and we ate while she asked about school, my friends, my plans for college. She was a good listener, asked thoughtful questions, seemed genuinely interested in my life. After dinner, she showed me around the property. The house sat on about 10 acres, mostly walnut trees with a large vegetable garden behind the house. She had chickens in a coop, a couple of cats that roamed the property, and a workshop where she made furniture as a hobby. "I like to stay busy," she said. "Retirement doesn't mean sitting around doing nothing. There's always something that needs attention around here." Around 9 p.m., I said I was tired and wanted to get some sleep. I'd been stressed about the situation with my parents, and the long drive from Stockton had worn me out. "Of course, honey," Helen said. "You get your rest. If you need anything during the night, anything at all, just call out. I'm always here." I went upstairs, brushed my teeth, and got ready for bed. The guest room was comfortable, and I could hear the peaceful sounds of the countryside through the open window, crickets, the distant sound of irrigation sprinklers, the occasional car on the rural road. I fell asleep easily around 10:30. I woke up at 2:47 a.m. with that unsettling feeling that someone was watching me. I opened my eyes and looked around the dark room. The curtains were open, and moonlight was streaming through the window, casting everything in a silvery glow. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Then I looked toward the doorway. Helen was standing there, perfectly still, just watching me sleep. She wasn't trying to hide or be sneaky about it. She was standing right in the open doorway, wearing a white nightgown, with her arms at her sides, just staring at me with this intense, focused expression. "Aunt Helen?" I said quietly, sitting up in bed. "Is everything okay?" She didn't respond immediately. Just kept staring for another few seconds, then said, "Just checking on you, sweetie. Making sure you're safe and comfortable." "I'm fine," I said, confused. "I was sleeping." "I know," she said. Sleep tight. I'll be nearby if you need anything. She turned and walked away, but I could hear her footsteps in the hallway, then the sound of a chair being moved around. It sounded like she was positioning furniture right outside my room. I got up and quietly approached the doorway. Helen had moved a wooden chair into the hallway and was sitting in it, facing my room. When she saw me, she smiled. "Just want to make sure you're safe," she said. "With everything that's been happening with your parents, I think it's important to keep a close eye on you. And Helen, I don't need you to watch me sleep. I'm 17, not 7. Oh, I know you're grown up," she said. "But you're under my roof now, and that makes you my responsibility. I take responsibility very seriously." I went back to bed, but I could feel her presence in the hallway. Every time I looked toward the door, she was there, sitting in that chair, watching. Not sleeping, not reading, just watching. I barely slept the rest of the night. The next morning, Helen acted like nothing unusual had happened. She made breakfast, chatted about her plans for the day, asked if I wanted to help with the garden. When I brought up the nighttime watching, she brushed it off. "I'm a light sleeper," she said. "Always have been. Comes from working night shifts at the hospital for 30 years. I just like to check on family when they're staying here." "But you sat in the hallway all night." "Not all night. Just when I heard you moving around. I wanted to make sure you weren't having nightmares or anxiety about your parents' situation." It sounded reasonable when she explained it, but something about the whole thing felt off. The way she'd been staring so intently, the fact that she'd moved a chair specifically to watch me, it didn't feel like normal concern. That second night, I tried to stay awake to see what would happen. I lay in bed with my eyes mostly closed, pretending to sleep, waiting to see if Helen would appear again. She did, around 1:30 a.m. But this time, she didn't just stand in the doorway. She actually entered the room and walked over to my bed. I kept my eyes mostly closed and tried to breathe normally, pretending to be asleep. Helen stood right next to my bed for at least 10 minutes, just watching me. I could feel her presence, hear her quiet breathing. At one point, she reached out like she was going to touch my face, but pulled her hand back. Then she whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "Just like Margaret. Just like my beautiful Margaret." I had no idea who Margaret was, but the way Helen said it, with this intense, emotional tone, made my skin crawl. After she left, I heard her moving around downstairs. Not just walking around, but actually doing things. I could hear cabinet doors opening and closing, the sound of papers rustling, what sounded like phone conversations conducted in whispers. The next morning, I asked Helen who Margaret was. Her entire demeanor changed. The friendly, concerned aunt expression disappeared, replaced by something cold and guarded. "Where did you hear that name? You said it last night when you were in my room." "I wasn't in your room last night." "Yes, you were. You stood next to my bed and said something about Margaret." Helen stared at me for a long moment, then turned back to making coffee. "You must have been dreaming." But I knew I hadn't been dreaming. And Helen's reaction told me that Margaret was someone important, someone Helen didn't want to talk about. I tried calling Mom that afternoon, but Helen said the landline was having problems and my cell phone couldn't get signal that far out in the country. She promised to drive me into town the next day so I could call from there. That third night, I decided I wasn't going to pretend to sleep. If Helen was going to watch me, she was going to have to do it knowing I was aware of it. Sure enough, around midnight, I heard the chair being positioned in the hallway. I got up and walked to the doorway. Helen was sitting there, but this time she had a photo album in her lap and a small flashlight. She was looking at pictures while glancing up at me periodically. "Who's Margaret?" I asked directly. Helen closed the photo album quickly. "You should be sleeping. I can't sleep with you watching me. This is really creepy, and Helen, why are you doing this?" She was quiet for a long moment, then opened the photo album again and showed me a picture. It was a girl about my age, with similar hair color and facial features. She looked like she could have been my sister. "This is Margaret," Helen said. She was my daughter. I was confused. Mom had never mentioned Helen having a daughter. She stayed with me when she was your age, Helen continued. Her parents were having problems too. Divorce, custody battles, all that ugliness. She came here to be safe. What happened to her? She left, Helen said, but her voice sounded strange. She left in the middle of the night. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't leave a note. Just gone. When was this? 15 years ago. She was 17, just like you. The way Helen was looking at the photo, then looking at me, made me deeply uncomfortable. It was like she was seeing Margaret when she looked at me, not her actual niece. Aunt Helen, I'm not Margaret. I'm Sarah, your sister's daughter. I know who you are, she said sharply. But you're so much like her. The same age, the same situation with your parents, the same vulnerability. That word, vulnerability, sent chills down my spine. I need to call my mom, I said. The phones aren't working. Then I need you to drive me to town tomorrow so I can call her. Helen closed the photo album. We'll see. There's supposed to be a storm coming. Might not be safe to drive. I looked outside. The sky was clear, full of stars. There was no storm coming. That's when I realized I wasn't a guest here. I was being held. I went back to my room and quietly started packing my things. I didn't have a car, but the main road was only about a mile walk through the orchards. If I could get out of the house early in the morning, I could walk to the road and flag down a car or find a house with a working phone. But when I tried to leave at dawn, I discovered that Helen had put new locks on all the exterior doors, the kind that required a key to open from either side. I was trapped. Going somewhere? Helen asked from the kitchen doorway. She was fully dressed, like she'd been awake all night. I want to call my mom. Your mom sent you here to be safe. And that's what I'm doing, keeping you safe. Safe from what? From making the same mistakes Margaret made. From running away and getting yourself hurt or killed. What really happened to Margaret and Helen? Her expression became distant, almost dreamy. She was ungrateful. After everything I did for her, all the care and protection I provided, she wanted to leave. She said I was suffocating her. She said she couldn't breathe here. So she left? She tried to leave, Helen corrected. But it wasn't safe for her out there. A 17-year-old girl, alone, no money, no family support. I couldn't let that happen. The way she said, couldn't let that happen, made my blood run cold. Where is Margaret now? Helen smiled, but it was the most disturbing smile I'd ever seen. She's safe. She's always been safe here. She just needed to understand that this is where she belongs. That's when I realized Margaret might still be in this house somewhere. I want to see her, I said. That's not possible right now. She's resting. I spent that day looking for ways to escape and trying to figure out where Margaret might be. The house had a basement, but Helen kept it locked. There was an attic, but the access ladder had been removed. Late that afternoon, while Helen was outside tending to her chickens, I found her key ring hanging in the kitchen and quickly tried the basement door. The basement was finished into a small apartment, bedroom, bathroom, sitting area. It was comfortable but had no windows and only one entrance. The bedroom had clothes in the closet that would fit a teenage girl, but they were styles from 15 years ago. And there were photos everywhere, pictures of Margaret at different ages, but all of them taken in this house, in this basement apartment. On the nightstand, there was a journal. The most recent entry was dated just 3 weeks ago. Day 5847. Helen brought me new books today. She says I'm looking pale and need to eat more. I told her again that I want to leave, that I'm 32 years old and have the right to make my own decisions. She got that look in her eyes again and said I'm not thinking clearly. She says the world outside isn't safe for someone like me. Sometimes I think she's right. It's been so long since I've been anywhere else, I don't know if I'd even know how to live out there anymore. Margaret was still alive. Helen had been keeping her prisoner in the basement for 15 years. I heard Helen coming back into the house, so I quickly put the journal back and locked the basement door, hanging the keys where I'd found them. That night, I pretended to go to bed normally, but I stayed awake planning my escape. I'd found a window in the upstairs bathroom that opened onto the roof over the back porch. If I could get out that way, I could climb down and run to the main road. Around 2 a.m., when I was sure Helen was in her nighttime vigil position outside my room, I quietly made my way to the bathroom. The window opened easily, and I was able to climb out onto the porch roof. From there, I could climb down the support posts to the ground. I ran through the walnut orchards toward the main road, but I hadn't gone more than a quarter mile when I heard Helen's voice behind me, calling my name. She had a flashlight and was moving through the trees much faster than I would have expected for a woman in her 60s. "Sarah! Come back here right now! It's not safe out there!" I kept running, but she was gaining on me. When I reached the main road, there were no cars in sight. The nearest house was at least another mile down the road. Helen caught up with me at the roadside. "Look at you," she said, not even breathing hard. "Running around in the dark, no shoes, no jacket. You could have been hurt. You could have been killed. Let me go, Helen. This is kidnapping. This is protection. Just like with Margaret. You girls never understand what's best for you." She had something in her hand, a syringe. "This will help you calm down," she said. "Help you think more clearly about the situation." I ran again, but this time toward the nearest house I could see in the distance. Helen followed, but she was calling out to me rather than chasing. "You can run, Sarah, but where are you going to go? You don't have any money, any identification, any way to contact your family. And what are you going to tell people? That your aunt was taking care of you? They'll just send you right back here." She was right about one thing: my purse, my ID, my phone, everything was back at the house. But I kept running until I reached a farmhouse about a mile down the road. I pounded on the door until an elderly man answered. "Please help me," I said. "My aunt is trying to drug me and keep me prisoner." The man, who introduced himself as George Martinez, let me inside and called the police. Within an hour, Sacramento County Sheriff's deputies were at Helen's house. What they found in the basement changed everything. Margaret Dawson, who was indeed Helen's daughter from a previous relationship, had been held captive for 15 years. Helen had convinced her over time that the outside world was dangerous, that she was mentally unstable, that she needed constant supervision and care. Margaret had been homeschooled, had never had a driver's license or social security card, had no legal identity as an adult. Helen had been collecting disability payments on her behalf, claiming Margaret was mentally incompetent. The journal I'd found wasn't just Margaret documenting her captivity, it was evidence of Stockholm Syndrome. After 15 years of psychological manipulation, Margaret genuinely believed she needed Helen's protection. Helen was arrested and charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, fraud, and multiple other felonies. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Margaret required extensive therapy and social services support to adjust to life outside her mother's control. The last I heard, she was living in a supervised facility and slowly learning basic life skills like using public transportation and managing money. The most disturbing part of the whole experience was realizing how easily it could have happened to me. If I hadn't found that basement apartment, if I hadn't discovered Margaret's journal, I might have ended up in the same situation. Helen's plan was to gradually isolate me from my family, convince me that I was safer staying with her, and slowly break down my independence until I became as dependent on her as Margaret had become. The psychological evaluation done during her trial revealed that Helen had a severe form of what's called caretaker syndrome. She needed to feel needed, to control and protect others, to the point where she would create dangerous situations just so she could be the rescuer. My parents' custody battle suddenly seemed like a minor problem compared to what I'd escaped. They worked out their differences pretty quickly after hearing what had happened, and we all got family therapy to deal with the trauma. But I still have nightmares about those 3 nights, feeling Helen's eyes watching me in the dark, hearing her whisper Margaret's name. And I think about Margaret, who lost 15 years of her life because she trusted someone who claimed to love her. The scariest part wasn't the physical imprisonment, it was the psychological manipulation. Helen genuinely believed she was protecting us, saving us from a dangerous world. In her mind, she was the hero of the story. Have you ever had a family member who seemed too concerned about your safety? Someone who wanted to know where you were every minute, who discouraged you from being independent? Sometimes the people who claim to love us the most can be the most dangerous, especially when their love comes with conditions and control. Because the truth is, there are people like Helen out there. People who use care and concern as weapons, who imprison others in the name of protection. And sometimes the hardest thing to recognize is when someone's love has become something twisted and dangerous. Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.